Donald Trump just sealed his first big trade deal of his second term, and it's with the UK. So, what does this mean for the tariff war and the rest of the world watching? Blaze Media's own Chris Bedford is here to break it all down. So, Chris, first of all, what is this deal doing? What are we getting into right now with the tariff wars? What's the latest?
Well, Britain's the first major power to actually get to the table and be able to negotiate something, which was not something that a lot of Capitol Hill watchers expected. Starmer was quick off the bat. I mean, no one actually thought that the new prime minister was going to get along with Donald Trump. He's a self-styled academic, left-leaning Englishman, but he actually did. He made a good impression very quickly. He said all the right things. You heard him on the phone call at the beginning of these negotiations. Essentially, he at one point, while kissing the ring of the president, also called him Donald, which I've not actually heard a lot of. Even in the privacy of the Oval Office, I don't think I hear people call him that. But I guess they're talking as peers there. And they came to a negotiation on this that got ahead of any of the Asian economies, got ahead of Israel, though it's supposedly close, got ahead of France and Germany, and actually figuring out some kind of trade negotiation. And the way the president explained it, and then Howard Lutnick explained it, is that this is a deal that gives Britain what it needs. Britain is kind of a fake world power. I mean, they've got a great history of being a phenomenal world power. At one point, the largest land empire on the planet. But they went through 2 world wars and then decades of socialist governance that carved up the wealth. They lost an entire generation in the First World War of their ruling elites and never quite recovered from that. And then decades and decades of bad policies. I mean, by the time Margaret Thatcher came in office, it was the poor man of Europe, and she was able to push it on the right track, but not really to change its broader trajectory. It becomes at this point in England difficult to be able to afford even to maintain the small military that they still have. And this is an issue for them of national importance. So they had to come up with a deal that protected the British worker and the British economy. And the way they did that was by looking at some of the different industries where they do import from in Europe and the different deals that they've cut, and trying to refocus those deals and those imports to the United States market, where they're bringing in American goods as opposed to maybe European goods. They made a carve out for some of the automobiles. The president put harsh tariffs on foreign automobiles, which totally makes sense given the fact that we import millions of foreign cars and at the same time can't even sell them. It's illegal to sell American cars in some of these markets, and other ones have massive tariffs that make it essentially untenable for people to buy them. So they rearranged that and they put a big tariff on foreign imports. But, myself included, people love Range Rovers. I don't know about Jaguar these days. I've kind of stepped in it a bit, but there's a love for English automobiles, despite the fact that their electrical work is complete garbage. So they made a carve out for about 100,000 vehicles to come in from England every year, or Britain every year, to only hit the 10% tariff mark and not any more. So what was announced today was agreement. That doesn't actually mean that there's a trade deal. The deal is going to need to be hammered out. There's a handshake, there's a press conference, and now the nitty-gritty details are going to be hammered out. But that's the broad outline. And it's important to rack these up because the White House is understaffed. Everybody's overworked. Even if they are completely staffed, it would probably be impossible to negotiate as many deals as need to be negotiated on trade in order to actually properly recreate the trade blocks and isolate China. And at the same time, we're left wondering, is that even the goal? As I got the opportunity to ask at the White House of Stephen Miller last week, what is the goal of the China tariffs? Is it to open up their markets or to isolate their economy? I think a lot of people would be rooting for the latter. I think that would be essential to the future of this country and securing another American century. But right now, it remains unseen what exactly the larger goal of this trade war is. And I tell you what, the president at the end of the day, I guess, was pretty gracious because his deal with one of the most powerful Protestant countries on the planet was quickly overshadowed by news from Catholic Vatican City, which, if I recall, was the only territory in the world to be exempted from tariffs on Liberation Day. I might be wrong on that, but I do recall seeing that circulating.
Well, Chris, it's always been amazing to me what you can get away with in a British accent, and calling the president Donald has to rank up there.
Come on, old boy. Come on, Donald, old boy.
I don't think he had a problem with it. You hear that, you hear your name and the accent, and Americans just go with it. So I do want to get to the Pope, by the way, in this interview. We need to talk about that with you. But the thing about this that it does do, at least in the narrative of the media business, is you've seen the legacy media has been yakking about how there are no deals. There are no deals. He's actually made no deals with no country. That's a theme even as late as last night. I was hearing. How does this impact, and set up the stage for actually getting a number of deals done that are going to be very complicated in the coming months?
Well, there's a race to be first in line, and that's been taken, but there's still going to be a race to be second and third and fourth. The countries want to export to the United States. Companies want access to our technologies. Companies want to be doing business with us. It's good business. We have all the cards, essentially. We have the commanding heights of the global economy. Countries want to be doing business in the United States, so they're eager to be able to get that. And the countries that get there first will essentially have a privileged trading agreement with the United States, as if we had free trade only with one country. Granted, we still have those 10% tariffs, which we think makes sense for protecting the economy and raising money, but this is what they're essentially doing. England won out. So this is going to be something that really pushes forward other countries to want to make that deal. And all these newspaper reporters who've been nitpicking and arguing, these things take time. These are international trade agreements. I'm old enough to remember when they said you couldn't even negotiate with Canada and Mexico in his first term. And he completely threw that on its head and was able to change and help out the United States, which had some pretty brutal trade deals with Canada and Mexico, and improve on those deals. I don't think they're perfect yet, but they're a long way toward going there. So this is something that Israel's watching enviously, something that definitely the European Union, for all its bluster, is watching with envy. I mean, the whole point of the European Union is to be a trading bloc initially. It was supposed to just be an economic cooperation zone that continued to amass power and authority until they're in charge of human rights and what you're allowed to post on social media. But that's and your immigration policy. But at the end of the day, it's still about money. And they still want to be able to do business in the United States. They're going to be watching with greedy eyes and hoping that they can be next.
Yeah, speaking of immigration policy, MP just mentioned the new Pope. I didn't think that we were going to get an American Pope, yet here we are. We have Leo XIV. Go ahead, give us your breakdown and how you actually see this working, in Donald Trump's favor or not, how this is going to play on the world stage as well.
I didn't think we'd get an American Pope either, but the Chicago way is undefeated since he was in charge of interviewing so many of these bishops and cardinals over the years. He's responsible for the jobs of so many of the people in that room. It's kind of funny. I also worry that the cardinals might not have selected an American Pope except to rebuke the United States from a special position. The previous Pope was very fond of doing so, despite having spent less than a week of his entire life in the United States. It's hard to say exactly what's going to go on. Pope Leo has chosen a very strong name. Pope Leo XIII, I have a poster of him in my Blaze office, an old picture surrounded by his curia, was an anti-modernist, a fierce anti-communist, someone who had a vision of hell with St. Michael the Archangel casting demons down into it that was so terrifying that when he came to from his vision, he wrote down the St. Michael's prayer, which is a beautiful prayer, and asked for it to be said after all masses, which my local parish still does, and all parishes ought to do. It's a good thing to teach your kids if they don't know it yet. CNN and other places, which don't know anything about Catholicism, are trying to push his worldview into, he's responsible for Catholic social justice. Well, that's stupid. He is the originator of Catholic social teaching, which is very anti-communist. It stresses the dignity of the individual and the dignity of the worker. It pushes back against the idea that the only group in the world that's fighting for the worker is global atheism. He was very strongly and openly against that. He's also, just a fun fact, the oldest pope, the first pope to ever be caught on live camera. Not live, but they've got an actual recording of him moving around, and there's no pope before him who's been recorded. So that's a cool thing to check out. The cardinal himself had a slightly back and forth record. It's not worth trying to fit American politics onto Catholic teaching. It's way older. It's way more important. It goes beyond Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative. So let's take what we know about the social issues. He's to the right of MAGA and the president on abortion. He's to the right of MAGA and the president on gay marriage. He is with them, and he fought the Peruvian government on instituting gender education in schools. At the same time, he's to the left of the Trump government on immigration. That's to be expected for someone who is a bishop in Peru and spent a lot of his life down there. And it also fits with a lot of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church's teaching, puts him in opposition, spoken to J.D. Vance. And an interesting tidbit is he was spotted as recently as 3 years ago performing privately the old rite in the Latin Mass. For a private mass. He wore full clerical garb out to his announcement, which is a break from Pope Francis, who of course broke from thousands of years of tradition, which is a good sign. He even as in the 80s and 90s was known as one of the lone priests who would perform the Latin Mass. He doesn't speak Latin fluently, but he can perform the Mass and can read it, read Latin. And this is an interesting thing for those people who like the Latin Mass. There are some interesting aspects I was a little worried about in his interviews. Like he talked about how the Catholic Church can no longer simply rely on authority that doesn't make sense in the modern world. Of course, the authority was given by God, and it ought to be respected. You can't be too shamed by the modern secular world not taking God seriously. His authority certainly isn't diminished. And he also talks a lot about unity. So does unity to him mean what it meant to his predecessor, which was stamping out all of the traditionalists and stamping out the Latin Mass? This cardinal is friends with Cardinal Cupich, who I'll never speak ill of the Pope, but I will speak ill of Cardinal Cupich. He's an awful, awful, awful person. He was close with him, so that's kind of a worrisome thing. Cupich, however, extremely anti-Latin Mass. So you see all these hot takes on Twitter from people who aren't Catholic, or from people who aren't practicing Catholics, or from people who are Catholic. And it's hard to actually piece together what is really going to happen with our new Pope. He's 69 years old. So unless the Italians poison him, he's going to be around for 20 or so years. He's going to be a major fixture in the globe and a major fixture in the church. He also was selected by Pope Francis to be a part of his curia because he was from outside the curia. He was not stuck with the Velvet Mafia in Rome. And Pope Francis, who was an enemy of the Velvet Mafia in Rome, wanted him to be an outsider who would be disruptive. So maybe he brings that. And it's even hard to tell exactly, as cardinals are company men. They don't generally rise by disagreeing with the Holy Father, who they owe obedience to. They rise generally by being agreeable people, company people. So did the viewpoints that he expressed in 2013 or in 2015, which ones of those really came from his soul versus which one of those was serving the wishes of the Pope, who he served? Just like with Francis, time will tell.
A great job of going through many of the positive highlights and facts that refute sort of the narrative that's emerging.
Always look on the bright side.
I have no doubt that we'll be talking about this a lot more, and we will see. I will say my own positive contribution to what you're saying is I have long said, whether they're on the left or right, if they actually had an American in there, it might give us a chance to clean house just on virtue of political structure alone, given that, although I love Italy and I love Rome and I love Italians, they don't have the best track record of governance in the last few hundred years.
No, the Papal States were not great places to live as a peasant or a farmer in Italy. I mean, Italy didn't have restaurants until like the 1960s. It's an American tradition of Italian restaurants. The poverty of Italy was so astounding that when a former slave an author toured Italy after in his freedom, he said he'd never, ever, former slave, seen children in such destitution as he saw in Sicily. So the governance, not always there. I know the church wasn't in charge of Sicily at that time, but maybe an American could bring a little art of the deal.
Yeah, that's maybe we'll be on the lookout. That's for sure. My favorite post on X today was Deep Dish defeats Pizza Balla.